Joining me now from Beirut is Lynn Malouf, Amnesty International's Middle East Research Director. Hello, thank you very much indeed for your time. First, how did you go about getting these testimonies?
Thank you for having me. We actually received 3 separate testimonies over the course of the past few days. And all 3 testimonies were talking about the same thing, basically repeating the fact that the detainees who've been held since May 2018, so for a few months now, still without any official charge brought against them, without any legal representation for the first 3 months of their detention. What is more concerning now than the actual fact of the arbitrary detention are these reports now of acts of torture and ill-treatment and sexual harassment. So the information that reached us is basically saying that these detainees have faced during the interrogations repeated electrocution, flogging. One person, as you just said, was hanged from the ceiling, and this has led some of the detainees not to be able to walk properly or stand up properly, and one of the detainees has tried to take her own life repeatedly in her own cell. So very, very worrying information reaching us.
And out of all of this information about the treatment of activists in Saudi jails, what would you say was the most shocking, or were you perhaps not surprised to hear this?
Well, I mean, over the course of the past few months, especially and particularly, we've come to realize that we should not be shocked by anything coming out of Saudi Arabia. The death of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi is a case in point. Now, we are not particularly surprised because Amnesty has been documenting reports of torture in detention and during interrogations over the past few years. And a lot of the trials of activists and political activists who have been just participating in protests or just expressing their views, when they have been brought to trial, they have been saying that they were subjected to torture, and yet they have been subjected to torture to force them to make and sign confessions. And yet these confessions have been used in their trials against them to confirm the verdicts. And there have been as far as we know, there have been no attempts by the judiciary to investigate any of these claims of torture. So the claims of torture today that have reached us are not a surprise in the sense that this is a pattern that we've been documenting over the past few years. Now, what is new to us are the claims of sexual harassment. That is new, but we are seeing new developments, each one more concerning than the other, like the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the first death sentence being proposed by the public prosecutor against a woman simply for having participated in a protest to demand greater rights for the Shia minority in Saudi Arabia, and now these reports of torture inside of the prisons.
Now, a little bit earlier, you mentioned Jamal Khashoggi because you've released these reports amid international outcry over his murder. The Washington Post, as we heard in a report we played just before, said that Donald Trump cares more about money than human rights. Do you think that without pressure from the US, there's little hope of Saudi Arabia's human rights record improving?
Yes, I do believe at Amnesty, we've been calling for this, that there needs to be concerted international pressure. So we're not waiting for condemnations right now. Even that has been scant in light of all of the violations that have been exposed. The change with the Jamal Khashoggi, or the change in direction, if you want, is that it's no longer possible to ignore the violations that have been happening. But we are still waiting for concrete measures to be taken. And that is why, since the very first week of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, Amnesty International, along with other human rights organizations, Reporters Sans Frontières, Human Rights Watch, the Committee to Protect Journalists, we have called, and the special rapporteurs, we have been calling for a UN-led investigation as the only credible pathway to justice into this murder.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Lynn Malouf from Amnesty International. Thank you.